Is this really happening? Are we talking about Richard Pitino coming back to Louisville? Well, we'll explain the pros and the cons of bringing the former Cardinal assistant back home. That said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pins. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As always, want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. A new name has surfaced for the Louisville men's basketball head coaching search, and it is quite a familiar one. Richard Pitino, son of former Louisville Cardinal Hall of Fame coach Rick Pitino, is apparently now in the running, and his name is picking up a ton of steam. And the fan base, I feel like a good amount of the fan base is extremely excited. And the others like, man, can we turn the page on the Pitino era in Louisville? Well, we'll see. I think the off-the-court strengths and on-the-court weaknesses present a very interesting situation for the Cardinals. It makes sense, but it also presents its fair share of risks. And then in the conclusion of the show, we will dive into a weekly mailbag. There have been some great questions surrounding this search that I want to dedicate some time to answer. So Richard Pitino's name started surfacing early in the week. Steve Rummage, host of Middays with Marcus Maben, went on the airwaves and basically publicly vouched for the Cardinals hiring Richard Pitino. Richard is now currently the coach of New Mexico, spent some time as an assistant with Louisville before taking over Florida International, then to Minnesota, and finally now to New Mexico. They won the Mountain West Conference championship and played one game in the NCAA tournament. But it's a very interesting situation because on the court, it's hard to spin. Off the court, however, it makes a ton of sense. So we'll start with the latter. The off-the-court strengths make a ton of sense for Richard Pitino for this job. Number one, obviously, there is the family tie with his father being Rick Pitino. Richard was an assistant here for quite some time. He recruited a lot of the beloved players that we've watched in the early 2010s, etc. So in terms of understanding this job and understanding the expectations and the pressure and the gravity of this position, there's probably not anyone else more acclimated with all of those things than Richard Pitino. He has lived here. He has been a coach here. He hasn't been in the first seat, but he's been in the second seat. His father knows, and apparently what I've heard is that Rick is advocating for Richard to go after the job. And for that, I think that you can essentially smooth over what has happened over the past decade at this point, what's happened over the past decade since 2017. But nonetheless, he understands the job and the expectations, something that Louisville fans have really been wanting. One of the issues with presenting some of these mid-major coaches is whether or not they are going to understand what's coming with this job. It's hard to say for guys that have never coached an NCAA tournament game. They've never won an NCAA tournament game at a mid-major. They've never coached at a Power 5. And for them to make a jump from mid-major to arguably, in my opinion, a top 5 to 6 to maybe even 7 job in college basketball, top 7 program in college basketball, that's a pretty substantial leap. And Richard Pitino right away would understand those expectations. I think that a good portion of the fan base at this point would be able to rally around a Richard Pitino hire because of the familiarity with the Pitino name. Not to mention his connection with the boosters, his ability to bring old boosters back into the fold, which has been one of the rumors, is that the hiring of Ricky Jr. would bring back some of the boosters that left when Tom Jurich and Rick Pitino were fired, bringing back some of the fan base that it would have taken some time to get back if you would have hired a guy like Josh Schertz or Pat Kelsey or Shaheen Holloway. And that's no disrespect to any of those guys, but Richard Pitino's name holds a little bit more weight within this city. And in recruiting as well. That's another thing, is if you are looking for this team to turn it around right away next season, I think Richard Pitino gives you the opportunity to do that on the recruiting trail. I've talked to a couple of people on the AAU trail and a college basketball analyst that said Richard Pitino's name obviously holds a little bit more weight because he's been doing it a little longer. He's obviously known because of his father, and with NIL's recruiting budget, or with Louisville's NIL recruiting abilities, it's a very solid opportunity for Louisville to turn over the roster next season and be competitive for the tournament. Now, we're going to talk about on-the-court weaknesses here in the second segment, so don't think this is me just ignoring the risks. We're talking about the off-the-court strengths at the moment because it's very fascinating to where most of the strengths come off the court. Most of the weaknesses are on the court and in the record resume. So you have the ability to get a good portion of the fan base back. You're bringing more boosters back. You're bringing more additional money to the university, to the NIL. And I think that is a very good thing. Only a couple hires I feel like Louisville can make that would do that. Another thing is Josh Hurd is wanting a coach that could potentially be a lifer. Richard Pitino is 41 years old. Arguably has at least a couple decades left coaching Power 5 basketball. And if everything goes well, I highly doubt Richard Pitino looks to jump at a different job like certain other candidates would. So I think that is definitely a positive as well. You have a coach that, like a Will Wade, sees this job as a destination job, takes it, succeeds, and rides out his career in the sunset with the Louisville Cardinals. That is what we want for this team. And one of the ways that you've been able to see that is on the other side in football. Jeff Brohm, one of the reasons why people wanted Jeff Brohm. Now, Brohm, it's hard to succeed at Purdue like it's hard to succeed at Minnesota, and Brohm's had more success at Purdue than Minnesota. But I think that his ability to relate with the fan base, because he knows this fan base and he understands the expectations, and he is going to be able to recruit as well. I guess just what I'm trying to say is that people are wanting Richard Pitino for a lot of the same reasons they wanted Jeff Brohm back in 2022, because I think Brohm obviously showed more success, but we also wanted someone who wanted to be here, who understood the expectations, didn't view Louisville as a stepping stone, was able to unite the fan base, to connect with the fan base, to connect with the media, to connect with the boosters, and to be able to utilize NIL. So far, Brohm has done all that in just one season. I feel like Richard Pitino could do a lot of those same things, and I think that that's probably where the allure comes from with this potential hire. Because, I mean, let's face it, since I know people are starting to miss Chris Mack a little bit more, and I think that that's a conversation for a different day. But one of the issues with Kenny Payne is that although he was one of our own, having won a national championship here, the vast majority of fans just truly never felt like they connected with the head coach. They obviously never had any idea what he was doing recruiting-wise. Didn't really feel like he understood the fan base. And I think the press conferences sort of showed that. But I think Richard Pitino offers a little bit of a different opportunity. Now, obviously, he would have to fulfill those desires that this fan base has, but I think he would be able to do that. And off the court, it just makes a whole lot of sense. However, it's not off the court that worries me about Pitino. It's what's happening on the court. If you take Richard Pitino's name off of his resume, I'd say 100% of the fans would say, thanks, but no thanks. So the main question is, can you project that Pitino will be able to grow as a head coach to be able to succeed a long time here at Louisville and ultimately be able to deliver a national championship to this university? A lot of people don't think so. We'll talk about the issue at hand there momentarily after we tell you about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament, whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed. It's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, that's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Also want to take this time to tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your #1 ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or you get your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Cardinal fans, are you watching Fox Sports on ESPN, or are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? If you have to turn down the volume because of all that shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for your everyday, bringing the news and best stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today, you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channel set, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your teams every day. On the court, Richard Pitino's resume leaves a lot to be desired. It's frankly sparked a lot of people to pose the hypothetical. If Richard Pitino's last name wasn't in fact Pitino, would he be considered for this job? The quick answer is no. But it's the same thing if you were to say, would Jeff Brohm be considered for this job if his last name was not Brohm? Highly, highly doubtful. Maybe, but I doubt it. But that doesn't take away the concerns that lie for Richard Pitino. He can connect with the fan base all he wants. He can show that he understands this job. He can connect with the boosters. He can bring in some solid players. He can state that he wants to be here for the rest of his coaching career. But if he does not win ball games, none of this matters. Point blank. At the end of the day, whoever the Louisville Cardinals bring in to replace Kenny Payne, one thing is at the priority of every single coaching hire. Can insert coach here win me ball games? Can they put me in a situation to be in the tournament every season to where we are contending for national championships? That's the expectation. No matter how low this program has sank over the past 5 years, the expectations remain the same. Let me repeat that again. No matter how low this program has sank on the court in terms of wins and losses, no matter the sanctions, no matter the black cloud of the NCAA, no matter the Dino Gaudio, Chris Mack stuff, I don't care. The expectations remain the same, and that is to compete for and win national championships. Anything else, and you are doing this program and this prestigious university a disservice. So can Richard Pitino take Louisville to the promised land? if you look at his resume, it's not going to excite you. He spent 1 year at Florida International. Now, that the year before under Isaiah Thomas, I think they only had 8 wins or so, and they ended up going 18-14. So he had a quick turnaround. He gets the Minnesota job. Now, let me preface this by saying that Minnesota is not an easy place to have sustained success. From what I've heard from people, basketball is just not one of the priorities up there for Minnesota. And in, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years coaching the Golden Gophers, he made the tournament twice. He had one tournament win. That was against, you guessed it, Chris Mack's Louisville Cardinals back in 2019. In those 8 seasons, you look back at what he did, half of those he had winning records overall. One of the 8 seasons, he had a winning record in conference play. Big Ten's been tough to play in, sure, but it doesn't really warrant a ton of excitement for a guy that really wasn't ever able to turn it around at Minnesota. I'm not making the excuse here, and you can't throw this out, just like you can't throw out Shaka Smart's tenure at Texas, although Smart has grown into his role at Marquette, just like Richard Pitino looks like he's grown into his role in New Mexico. The only thing I can say is that when he took over Minnesota, he was under 35 years old. And there have been plenty coaches that have been average to subpar in their first 12 seasons. John Wooden and Bill Self being 2 of them. If you need a full list, go check out Kelly Dickey's tweet. I think it's at Real Card Game is his Twitter. He lists those coaches. And he's not lighting the world on fire. What he did in Minnesota, it's not going to warrant a ton of excitement. He gets fired from Minnesota immediately, like, boom. New Mexico comes calling. He takes over New Mexico and coaches the Lobos. Year 1, they go 13-19. He then goes 22-12. They are ranked for a portion of the season. They don't make the NCAA tournament. This past year, 26-10, they get up to 19 in the AP poll, and they win the conference championship. They go to the NCAA tournament. They get beat by 20 to Clemson. I think that if you're looking specifically at the win-loss column, he didn't have a winning conference record at Minnesota. He doesn't have one at New Mexico now, but this year's team at New Mexico was a top 50 team, Ken Palm, in terms of offense and defensive rankings. Take that for what you will. I feel like we've yet to see the best of Richard Pitino. Now, what does the best look like, though? And that's the main question. You're putting a lot of risk here on a coach that has not had one season of less than 10 losses in his career. You're putting a lot of risk into that. The hope is that, he has recruited pretty decently for the stops that he's been, which he's been at disadvantageous spots to recruit since he's been a head coach. But he will be exposed to more resources, more NIL funds, and more opportunities here at Louisville than anywhere that he has coached by far. The hope is that with the failed stint in Minnesota, he's able to learn from that. He's 41 years old, and we hope that he's able to get to a spot to where he is gradually improving over and over and over, because coaches don't really hit their prime until late 40s, early 50s, usually, give or take. You're hoping he's learning from his Minnesota stint. With the NIL recruiting budget, you're hoping that he recruits the portal well and the high school ranks well, and he's able to put a winning team on the court. I think ultimately, with Pitino at the helm, you can make the tournament year 1. But I don't think it's making the tournament that concerns me. It's whether or not he can take you further than that and contend for a national championship. And so far, he's not been able to show that. He's been at spots where it's been tough to do so. Not many people do succeed a ton at Minnesota or Florida International. The concerns surrounding Ricky P. Jr., they're valid. But do the off-the-court strengths and the age factor play a role into the hire that overlooks some of those risks. I think that ultimately might be ending up to be the case. Only thing we can do now is just wait and see. It seems like this coaching search changes over and over. And I think that's what frustrates the fan base is how long this is going on. If Richard Pitino is the guy, you probably need to hire him sooner rather than later. Because though each day longer that you wait, you lose that much more time recruiting in the transfer portal, trying to flip a roster to have been competitive for NCAA tournament consideration next season. So just some food for thought, but that's my opinion on the matter. People have asked a ton of questions to me on Twitter Spaces and about the basketball coaching search that I'm going to answer here in the weekly mailbag segment coming up here shortly. I'm going to do that, however, after I tell you about our friends over at Nissan. This week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by our friends over at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. The NC State Wolfpack are obviously this week's Nissan Rogue. The team absolutely surprised us with a powerful performance in their first two games of the tournament. Wins over Texas Tech and Oakland have set them up to play Marquette in the Sweet 16. They say, win life, go Rogue. That's exactly what the Golden Grizzlies have done here. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Not Golden Grizzlies, I'm sorry. Wolfpack. I saw Oakland put Golden Grizzlies. But nonetheless, shop NissanUSA.com. Couple of great questions in this week's edition of the mailbag for the Locked On Louisville podcast. A couple of questions that I want to answer. First up, pretty much is a direct connection with what I ended with. And the first question is, what do you think about the timing of the search? I think that so far it hasn't been an issue. I was looking for a hire to be made this week. I still think it probably needs to be done this week, truthfully, because I mean, at this point, it's like, why didn't you wait to fire Kenny Payne on April 1st and save $2 million rather than, rather than firing him right away and having to eat the $2 million when you don't even have a coach at the moment. So I think a hire needs to be made this week. There have been social media campaigns for multiple candidates, Mick Cronin, Will Wade, and now Richard Pitino. What do you feel like the overall effect, of coaching, of social media plans? How do they have effect on coaching? Or how do they have effect on, I wrote this down all weird, I can't even read my own handwriting. How do they have effect on the perception of a candidate? I think sometimes it can be viewed as annoying if it's like one person doing it and they're spamming under everyone's post. But like for Will Wade, like the people over at Power 10, the spaces that everyone has gravitated toward to voice their opinion and talk to the rest of the fan base, they are very big Will Wade fans, as am I. And it's been awesome to see them publicly vouch for a guy like Will Wade and show support, because at the end of the day, we're all fans vouching for our favorite candidate that we want. And for those to say, well, why are you doing this? Why not? Who cares at the end of the day? It's just who we want to see as the coach. The same thing for Richard Pitino. If you want him and you are vouching to go get Richard Pitino, so be it. Who cares? That's who you want to see. I mean, some might view it as annoying, but ultimately I respect it, because as a fan base, we need to come together and accept those with different opinions. The society in general has created a rift in two sides, three sides, or how many sides of an argument because of viewpoints, and we're not accepting each other for who we are as people and just the viewpoints. So I'm not a big fan of that, but I don't have a problem with the social media campaigns for any candidates. I actually applaud them and respect the gig. What do you believe is the number one thing that Josh Hurt is looking for in this search? I don't know. I'll be honest with you. If I knew, I would let you know. But for me, I personally think it is probably a mixture of things. I don't think it's just one thing, but a guy that wants to be here, number one, I think would be at the priority or at the top of the priority. But ultimately, I don't know, and that is what it is. Do you think that this fan base is too divided to get back to the way we used to be? I think society is too divided to get back to the way we used to be. I think social media has really hurt society because it's almost being taught to believe that if we disagree on something, that is a direct reflection of someone's character and who they are. Therefore, if you don't agree with me, I should dislike you. And it's almost like that's how we're being taught nowadays. And I don't like that. I don't think anybody likes that, but that's how it is sort of coming around to be. So as it relates to this fan base, we're as divided as we've ever been. Now, football, we've started to come together. Basketball, Louisville, the city of Louisville is Cardinal basketball and vice versa. So there still is a long way to go. And I think that it's about having conversations. For example, the Power 10 spaces. At one point, I criticized Power 10. Now, this was for some issues that I had that I have since reached out and apologized for. But it doesn't reflect what I think about Power 10. The Power 10 spaces were introduced to Twitter to give the fan base a voice and allow them to voice opinions, those that want to be heard. And I know radio shows, you can only accept so many callers, but the Power 10 spaces, they do spaces morning, afternoon, evening. They allow people to get their feelings off their chest and speak their minds and go out and really practice what they preach. And that's something that I respect. That's something that I'd love to see, because for the first time, it feels like there's been an actual effort to bring this fan base together cordially amongst the social media wave. So I think that's the main thing for me. If you are on Twitter, be sure to follow Power 10. I don't know their exact but be sure to follow them, because they have a ton of spaces that you can hop into and listen to Louisville sports at almost any time of the day and be able to speak and voice your opinion and have cordial conversations. So nothing but respect to the people over there. I've got some solid friends that are within that group, but it's quickly becoming more and more popular, and it's great to see personally. So be sure to check them out. Big fan of Power 10 and Mike Rutherford hosting spaces. I've posted a couple spaces here and there. I love to hear what the fan base has to say. So I respect what Power 10 has done. But that's going to wrap up this weekly mailbag. This is posting on Tuesday evening at about 8:45, 9 o'clock. I don't know what in the hell is going to happen with this coaching search. I don't know what is going to be true Wednesday that wasn't true Tuesday and vice versa. So be sure to keep that in mind. But that's going to wrap up this episode of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Go